Listen, France, your terrorists just attacked Ouagadougou, killed 37 innocent Burkinabe. You armed them, you trained them, and you sent them thinking this breaks us. You're wrong. Every French citizen in West Africa leaves in 72 hours. Every French company gets seized immediately. Every French ally gets expelled. You wanted war. You got war. I'm taking revenge for every drop of Burkinabe blood spilled. Let me tell you exactly what happened. The attack happened Tuesday morning at 7:30. Central Ouagadougou. 3 simultaneous bombings. Market District first. 14 dead instantly. Normal morning shattered by explosion. Bus station second. 13 killed waiting for transport. Workers commuting. Students traveling to school. Lives ended in seconds. Shopping area third. 10 dead including children. Families starting their day. Destroyed without warning. 37 total dead. 123 wounded. Hundreds traumatized. Everyone asking, what does Traore do next? Bombers were identified within hours. Security cameras captured everything. 3 men, early 20s, arrived separately, met at predetermined locations, detonated simultaneously at 7:30 exactly. Military precision, professional coordination, not an amateur operation. Training was obvious. Discipline was obvious. Funding was obvious. State backing was obvious. Investigation moved rapidly because we knew where to look. France always leaves signatures, always uses the same methods, always makes the same mistakes. First bomber was Amadou Diallo, Malian national, age 23, crossed the border 3 weeks prior on forged documents. The documents were high quality, professional forgeries, stayed at guest house owned by French businessman named Laurent Mercier. Mercier left Burkina Faso Monday evening, 24 hours before attack, purchased last-minute ticket to Paris. Coincidence? Obviously not. Mercier has intelligence connections, worked for French companies with defense contracts, traveled frequently between Ouagadougou and Paris, perfect cover for intelligence officer. We're pursuing extradition. France will refuse. Proves complicity. Second bomber was Ibrahim Traore, also Malian, age 22, similar profile, cross-border same time as Diallo, different route, same handler probably, stayed different location, same French connections. Investigation found Western Union transfers, money sent from Abidjan, traced to Shell Company, company registered in France. Directors are intelligence operatives, not proven officially, obvious operationally. Money trail is clear, evidence is solid, French financing is undeniable. Third bomber was Moussa Keita, age 24, different background, Burkinabe originally, lived in Ivory Coast for 5 years, recruited there obviously, radicalized there probably, trained there certainly. French intelligence operates extensively in Ivory Coast, controls security services, runs recruitment networks. Keita fit profile perfectly, young, unemployed, resentful, easy target for recruitment. French excel at exploitation, excel at manipulation, excel at using Africans killing Africans while claiming innocence. Explosives were C4, military grade, not available commercially, not manufactured locally, imported illegally, traced to Libyan stockpiles through chemical analysis, same stockpiles that disappeared after NATO destroyed Libya, same stockpiles CIA distributed across region, same stockpiles used in multiple terrorist attacks across Sahel. Pattern is clear, source is clear, responsibility is clear. This wasn't local terrorism, this was state-sponsored operation, French operation, designed destabilizing Burkina Faso, designed punishing me, designed reversing revolution. Communications intercepts confirmed suspicions. We monitor French military and intelligence frequencies constantly. Technology provided by Russian partners, very effective, very revealing. Captured multiple conversations planning this operation. 3 days before attack, French officers discussing targets, discussing timing, discussing political objectives, discussing expected casualties, discussing media narratives, everything planned, everything calculated, everything approved. Recordings are clear, translations are verified, evidence is irrefutable. France ordered this massacre. Timing reveals strategy. Attack occurred exactly 1 year after gold nationalization. Anniversary is not coincidence. France remembers. France resents. France retaliates. Attack also precedes African continental currency launch by 2 months. Disrupting preparations was objective. Creating instability scares investors, scares partners, isolates Burkina Faso, standard French playbook, economic warfare through terrorism, political pressure through violence, sovereignty challenges through blood, worked historically elsewhere, won't work here, won't work now. Burkinabe response was immediate, not fear, rage. Massive demonstrations erupted spontaneously. Wednesday morning, hundreds of thousands marched. Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso, every major city, demanding justice, demanding retaliation, demanding French expulsion, demanding asset seizure, demanding total break. Popular will is unambiguous. Population supports confrontation, supports escalation, supports revenge. This gives me mandate, political necessity actually. Cannot ignore popular demands, must respond decisively, must respond comprehensively, must respond permanently. My response has 7 dimensions, each designed maximizing pressure on France, each designed ending French influence completely, each designed establishing precedent for Africa, each designed showing resistance succeeds. First dimension is diplomatic rupture, French ambassador expelled immediately, given 12 hours leaving, left within 6, embassy closed, staff expelled, 72-hour deadline, all complied. Our ambassador recalled from Paris, diplomatic relations suspended indefinitely, no dialogue, no negotiations, no normalization. France pays first, apologizes first, compensates first, then maybe we talk. Second dimension is economic seizure. Every French company nationalized immediately. Presidential decree, legal authority, emergency powers, Total Energies gas stations seized, Orange telecommunications networks seized, Bolloré transport and logistics seized, Société Générale bank branches seized, AXA insurance operations seized, Bouygues construction projects seized, everything French owned, everything transferred to state, everything operated by Burkinabe now. Estimated value exceeds $3 billion, largest single nationalization in our history, compensates partially for decades of exploitation, compensates symbolically for 37 murdered civilians. Third dimension is population expulsion. All French citizens must leave. 72-hour deadline from Wednesday midnight. Business people, teachers, NGO workers, missionaries, tourists, everyone. Approximately 800 French nationals resided here. Most departed immediately. Some protested. Doesn't matter. Security requires removing French presence completely. Cannot distinguish ordinary citizens from intelligence operatives, cannot risk infiltration, cannot trust French government. Everyone goes. Humanitarian considerations. France murdered 37 civilians. France forfeits humanitarian considerations. Deadline expires Saturday midnight. Remaining French face detention until France negotiates compensation. Fourth dimension is alliance coordination. Called President Goïta in Mali immediately after attack. Full briefing, full evidence sharing, full coordination. Mali expelled French citizens yesterday. Nationalized French companies yesterday. Announced at press conference. Solidarity with Burkina Faso. United response to French terrorism. Called President Chiani in Niger similarly. Parliament voting today on identical measures. Will pass unanimously. Popular pressure is overwhelming. 3 nations acting simultaneously. France cannot isolate us, cannot divide us, cannot defeat us. Together we're strong. Together we're protected. Together we win. Fifth dimension is military operations, not invading France obviously. Asymmetric response, targeting French proxy networks instead. Terrorist groups France finances, arms, trains, directs against us. We know their locations, we know their leaders, we know their structures. Russian intelligence provided detailed maps. Chinese satellites provided imagery. Turkish drones provided reconnaissance, everything needed for surgical strikes. Operations began Thursday. Special forces, covert operations across borders, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, coordinated simultaneously. Eliminated 17 terrorist leaders in 48 hours. More operations continuing. Systematic elimination, comprehensive destruction. French proxy network is dying. France is losing ground assets, losing intelligence sources, losing operational capability. Sixth dimension is intelligence warfare, identifying every French agent in West Africa, every intelligence officer, every recruited collaborator, every paid informant, building comprehensive database, sharing with allies, coordinating arrests, neutralizing networks systematically. Russian counterintelligence assistance is invaluable. Russians have centuries of experience fighting Western intelligence, teaching us everything. Chinese signals intelligence helps enormously. Intercepting communications, tracking movements, identifying patterns. Within 6 months, we'll eliminate French intelligence infrastructure completely. France will be blind here, cannot monitor, cannot predict, cannot respond. Strategic advantage shifts decisively toward us. Seventh dimension is international mobilization, exposing French terrorism globally, releasing intercepted communications, publishing evidence, distributing through Chinese media, Russian media, Al Jazeera, African media, social media, everywhere. Building international awareness, building condemnation, building pressure. France commits war crimes. France sponsors terrorism. France murders civilians. World must know. World must respond. World must hold France accountable. Some Western media ignores evidence. Some Western governments support France. Expected, but Global South is watching. Global South is understanding. Global South is supporting us. Majority of humanity stands with Burkina Faso against French terrorism. French response predictable, denying everything, calling evidence fabricated, calling me paranoid dictator, calling attack unfortunate terrorism that France opposes, standard lies, expected lies, meaningless lies, evidence speaks louder than denials, intercepted communications are authentic, chemical analysis is verified, financial trails are documented, witness testimony corroborates everything. France's denials convince nobody except willfully ignorant Western audiences consuming corporate media uncritically. Rest of world sees truth clearly. France is also threatening consequences, sanctions, trade restrictions, asset freezes, diplomatic isolation, military intervention possibilities, empty threats mostly. Sanctions? We have alternatives. Chinese trade, Russian trade, Turkish trade, many others. Don't need French trade. Asset freezes? We hold no significant assets in France. Moved everything to China and Russia already. Smart planning. Diplomatic isolation. Africa supports us. Asia supports us. Latin America supports us. Only West isolates us. Only West matters decreasingly. Military intervention. Try it. See what happens. Russian security guarantees activate. Chinese support mobilizes. Regional alliance responds. African Union condemns. Global South opposes. France cannot win military intervention. France knows this. Threats are bluffing. Regional implications are transformative. 3 nations simultaneously expelled France completely. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso creates Francophone Africa bloc rejecting France. Historic development. Unprecedented unity. Other nations watching carefully. Senegal considering similar actions. Guinea already aligned. Chad wavering. Central African Republic interested. Gabon watching. Ivory Coast reconsidering French alignment. Continental cascade is possible. One domino falls, others follow. French Africa could disappear within years. French nightmare, African dream, Pan-African reality approaching. Economic impacts are manageable contrary to French predictions. Nationalized French companies continue operating under state management. Employees retained, services maintained. Production continues. Actually improves in some cases because profit motivations changes. State companies prioritize service over profit, prioritize employment over efficiency, prioritize development over dividends, better outcomes for populations, worse outcomes for shareholders. That's the point. Economics serves people, not corporations, not foreigners, not exploitation. Alternative partnerships are materializing rapidly. Chinese companies eager replacing French companies. Better terms, better technology, better training, better everything. Russian companies similarly interested. Turkish companies, Indian companies, Gulf companies, many options, many partners, all offering better deals than France ever offered. Because we negotiate from strength now, because alternatives exist, because we're not desperate, because we're not alone. Partnership dynamics changed fundamentally. We choose partners. Partners don't choose us. We set terms. Partners accept or leave. Revolutionary transformation from previous subordination. African continental currency preparations continue despite attack, actually accelerate because attack proved necessity of monetary independence. Currency launch scheduled June 1st, 2 months away. 8 nations participating initially. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, Chad, Senegal, Gabon. Central African Republic, combined population 200 million. Combined GDP $300 billion, significant economic bloc, currency backed by gold reserves, mineral resources, oil revenues, solid backing, credible currency, China committed accepting for bilateral trade, Russia similarly, Turkey, India, others considering. Currency will succeed despite French opposition, because fundamentals are sound, because political will exists, because alternatives to CFA franc and dollar dependency are necessary. Security improvements follow French expulsion, counterintuitively perhaps. Western analysts predicted security deterioration, predicted terrorism increasing, wrong completely. Terrorism is decreasing, because French intelligence sponsored most terrorism, created instability deliberately, maintained insecurity strategically. Without French interference, security improves naturally, regional cooperation helps enormously, intelligence sharing, border coordination, joint operations, everything impossible when France divided us. Possible now that France is expelled. Security is sovereignty issue. Sovereign nations secure themselves. Occupied nations remain insecure by design. We're becoming truly sovereign, therefore truly secure. Popular support is overwhelming. Approval ratings increase significantly after attack and after my response. People appreciate decisiveness, appreciate confrontation, appreciate sovereignty. Previous leaders would have begged France for help, would have compromised, would have surrendered, would have betrayed national interests for personal security and foreign aid. I did opposite, confronted France, expelled France, seized French assets, defended sovereignty absolutely. Population recognizes difference, appreciates difference, supports difference. This is new leadership, revolutionary leadership, servant leadership, popular leadership. Leadership that serves Burkinabe interests exclusively regardless of Western preferences or Western threats or Western terrorism. Military morale is exceptionally high. Soldiers appreciate being led by someone who values their lives, who avenges their fallen comrades, who confronts enemies directly, who doesn't surrender. Previous governments sacrificed soldiers in wars serving French interests. Soldiers died protecting French companies, protecting French citizens, protecting French influence, died for nothing, for foreigners, for exploitation. My government is different. Soldiers fight for Burkina Faso, for Burkinabe interests, for sovereignty, for independence, for dignity, fighting for something meaningful, something worthy, something that justifies ultimate sacrifice if necessary. Morale reflects purpose. Purpose reflects leadership. Leadership reflects values. Values reflect revolution. Youth are particularly energized. See possibilities previously unimaginable. See leadership refusing Western dictation. See nation asserting sovereignty. See Africa rising. See future worth building. Youth unemployment remains high. Economic challenges continue. But hope exists now. Hope changes everything, changes energy, changes commitment, changes willingness sacrificing for collective good. Revolution depends on youth. Youth drive change. Youth accept risks. Youth imagine differently. Youth build futures. Mobilizing youth effectively is revolution's guarantee. Youth are mobilized now. Revolution is secure. International solidarity is building systematically. Progressive movements worldwide support Burkina Faso. Understand anti-imperialist struggle. Understand sovereignty fights. Understand resource nationalism. Support our resistance. Support our confrontation. Support our revolution. Labor unions, student movements, political parties, religious organizations, many groups, many countries, all expressing solidarity, organizing protests outside French embassies, demanding France stop terrorism, demanding France respect sovereignty, demanding France leave Africa. People power is emerging globally, supporting African independence, challenging Western dominance, building alternative world order. Solidarity matters practically through creating political pressure on Western governments, matters symbolically through showing we're not alone, matters historically through building movements that transcend borders and that challenge empire collectively rather than individually. Media warfare is intensifying. French media attacks me constantly. Dictator, terrorist, radical, dangerous. Every insult, every smear, every lie, trying destroying reputation, trying isolating internationally, trying undermining domestically, standard tactics, ineffective tactics, because people trust their experiences more than foreign media, because alternative media provides counter-narratives, because social media enables direct communication, because truth spreads despite propaganda. French media control is weakening, French narrative power is declining, French influence is dying. Information democratization is revolutionary force undermining imperial propaganda permanently. African media is crucial. African journalists understand context, understand history, understand French crimes, report honestly, report sympathetically, report accurately. African audiences trust African media more than Western media. Trust is deserved. African media serves African interests. Western media serves Western interests. Simple logic. African media is strengthening across continent. Better funding, better training, better technology, better everything. African voices are emerging. African perspectives are spreading. African narratives are challenging Western monopolies. This is decolonization. This is sovereignty. This is power shifting from colonizers to colonized finally after centuries of silencing. Chinese media coverage is extensive and sympathetic. CGTN, Xinhua, People's Daily, Global Times, all major outlets providing detailed coverage, presenting Burkinabe perspective, exposing French terrorism, building international awareness, reaching billions globally. Chinese media reach rivals Western media now, sometimes exceeds Western media. Alternative narratives matter enormously. Alternative facts matter enormously. People need choices, need options, need alternatives to Western propaganda. Chinese media provides that. Russian media provides that. Many others provide that. Information pluralism is emerging, serving anti-imperialist movements, serving global South interests, serving truth over propaganda. Economic trajectory remains positive despite crisis. GDP growth continues. Agricultural production increases. Mining revenues grow. Industrial output expands. Services sector develops. All positive indicators. All contradicting Western predictions of collapse. All proving sovereignty and development are compatible. Actually, sovereignty enables development by keeping wealth domestically rather than allowing extraction, by prioritizing national interests rather than serving foreign capital, by investing revenues in people rather than enriching shareholders. Development economics is simple, actually. Control resources, invest wisely, build capacity, serve population, maintain sovereignty. Results follow inevitably. We're proving this. Others are learning. Continental transformation accelerates. Future trajectory is clear. French influence ends completely in West Africa within 5 years. Other colonial powers follow. British, American, all expelled eventually. African sovereignty becomes real. Resources stay in Africa. Wealth stays in Africa. Development happens in Africa. For Africans. By Africans. Pan-African unity advances. African Continental Free Trade Area integrates economies. African Continental Currency unifies monetary policy. African Continental Defense Alliance protects sovereignty. African Union strengthens institutionally. Everything Gaddafi envisioned. Everything Sankara wanted. Everything Nkrumah dreamed. Everything Lumumba died for. Everything happening now. Finally. After decades of waiting, after decades of suffering, after decades of resistance, victory is coming, independence is coming, renaissance is coming, African century is coming. This attack won't stop that. This attack accelerates that. This attack proves we're winning. Proves France is desperate. Proves revolution succeeds. Proves Africa rises. Proves empire falls. Proves history turns. Proves justice comes. Finally, completely, permanently. Watch Africa rise. Watch France fall. Watch empire crumble. Watch sovereignty emerge. Watch independence flourish. Watch dignity restored. Watch justice served. Watch revolution triumph. Watch history vindicate our struggle. Watch everything change. Everything is changing now. Attack is catalyst, not obstacle. Blood is fuel, not break. Terror is weakness, not strength. Desperation is evident. Victory is certain. Africa wins. France loses. History decides. Justice comes. Watch. Continental defense integration proceeds rapidly following attack, proving necessity of collective security arrangements protecting revolutionary governments from Western-sponsored terrorism and from direct Western military intervention and from economic warfare and from all methods imperial powers deploy preventing African independence. Defense pact signed last year becomes operational now with headquarters established in Ouagadougou and with joint command structure and with integrated intelligence operations and with coordinated military exercises and with mutual defense obligations requiring members responding within 24 hours when any member faces external aggression or terrorist attacks or coup attempts or any security threat emanating from outside forces attempting destabilizing revolutionary governments. Military integration involves standardizing equipment using Russian and Chinese platforms, replacing incompatible Western systems that prevented effective cooperation and that maintained dependency on Western suppliers for spare parts and ammunition and training. Standardization enables ammunition sharing during emergencies and enables maintenance cooperation and enables joint training that builds interoperability and combat effectiveness far exceeding individual national capabilities. Russian weapons are reliable, proven in multiple conflicts, cheaper than Western alternatives, and come without political conditions attached, unlike Western weapons sales that include demands for political alignment and policy concessions and human rights performances and democracy standards that serve as tools for political interference and control. Joint training exercises began last month with Malian, Nigerian, and Burkinabe forces conducting combined operations in border regions targeting terrorist networks that operate across boundaries, exploiting gaps in national coverage and lack of coordination that previously prevented effective counterterrorism. Exercises revealed capability gaps requiring addressing through additional training and through equipment modernization and through tactical innovations adapted to Sahelian environment and asymmetric threats that characterize regional security challenges. Russian and Chinese military advisors participate in training, providing expertise in counterinsurgency and in intelligence operations and in communication security and in every domain where Western withdrawal left capability gaps requiring filling through alternative partnerships. Intelligence Fusion Center operates continuously pooling information from national intelligence services and from partner nations including Russia and China and from signal intelligence and human intelligence and from aerial reconnaissance using Turkish and Chinese drones, providing real-time battlefield awareness impossible when nations operated independently with limited capabilities. Fusion Center identified terrorist safe havens in remote border areas and tracked financial flows funding operations and identified recruitment networks and mapped command structures enabling targeted strikes, eliminating leadership systematically and disrupting operations comprehensively. Counterterrorism effectiveness improved dramatically through coordination, proving that unity creates security while division creates vulnerability, that external powers exploit maintaining instability serving their interests. Border security cooperation involves joint patrols and coordinated checkpoints and information sharing, preventing terrorists and smugglers and arms traffickers exploiting porous borders and jurisdictional gaps between nations. Previously, borders were security liabilities because insufficient resources prevented effective monitoring and because lack of coordination allowed criminals and terrorists moving freely between countries, evading national authorities operating within territorial limits. Now borders become security assets through cooperation, transforming barriers between nations into joint security zones, defended collectively with resources pooled and capabilities integrated, creating defensive depth impossible for individual nations achieving alone. Air defense integration is priority given French capabilities conducting airstrikes and given potential Western intervention requiring deterrence through credible air defense capabilities. Russian S-300 and Panzer systems deployed across alliance territory create layered defense protecting capitals and military installations and critical infrastructure from aerial attack. Systems are integrated through common command and control, enabling coordinated response to aerial threats and enabling mutual support where defensive systems from multiple nations combine, creating redundancy and coverage gaps, elimination and survivability through distribution, preventing single strike destroying defensive capabilities. Air defense fundamentally changes strategic calculations because Western military doctrine depends on air superiority achieved through overwhelming force, destroying enemy air defenses, quickly enabling subsequent operations proceeding without aerial threat. Credible integrated air defense denies air superiority, making Western intervention prohibitively costly in casualties and lost aircraft and failed objectives, creating deterrence through denial rather than through retaliation threats. Cyber defense cooperation is critical because modern warfare includes cyber domain, and because Western intelligence agencies conduct extensive cyber operations targeting government networks and financial systems and critical infrastructure, attempting disrupting operations and stealing information and creating chaos, serving political objectives. Chinese cybersecurity assistance is invaluable because China possesses world-class capabilities developed defending against continuous Western cyber attacks and because Chinese technology is secure, unlike Western technology containing backdoors enabling intelligence access. Huawei telecommunications equipment is replacing Western equipment across alliance members, eliminating intelligence vulnerabilities and improving security fundamentally. Cyber defense training from Chinese and Russian experts builds indigenous capabilities, detecting intrusions and preventing data breaches and maintaining operational security essential for protecting sensitive information from Western intelligence collection. Space-based reconnaissance provided by Chinese and Russian satellites gives alliance battlefield awareness previously impossible when dependent on Western satellite imagery that was either unavailable or deliberately degraded or provided selectively to manipulate decision-making serving Western interests. Independent satellite access from partner nations enables monitoring terrorist movements and tracking military deployments in neighboring countries, and observing Western military activities in region and verifying compliance with agreements and supporting military operations through targeting information and damage assessment. Space capabilities are force multipliers, transforming military effectiveness and enabling operations impossible without overhead reconnaissance, proving that technology access from partners is strategic asset, equalizing advantages that Western militaries enjoyed through monopolizing advanced technologies. Naval cooperation is developing, focused on protecting Gulf of Guinea maritime interests and preventing piracy and securing sea lanes and monitoring foreign naval activities, including French and American warships operating in regional waters. Burkina Faso lacks coastline but benefits from securing regional maritime domain through alliance members with coastal access cooperating jointly. Nigerian and Ghanaian navies are potential partners if those governments align with revolutionary movement. Currently, they maintain Western alignment, but popular pressure is building an eventual shift toward independence. Coalition is probable. Maritime security matters because oil exports and trade routes and fishing rights and offshore resources all require naval capabilities, protecting against foreign interference and against criminal activities and against military threats from external powers. Special operations forces receive particular emphasis because asymmetric warfare characterizes Sahelian security environment and because special operations provide capabilities conducting cross-border strikes against terrorist leadership and conducting intelligence gathering and conducting sabotage against enemy infrastructure and conducting other missions requiring stealth and precision that conventional forces cannot execute effectively. Russian Spetsnaz and Chinese special forces train alliance special operators in advanced techniques including close-quarters combat and explosives and parachute operations and underwater infiltration and sniper operations and interrogation resistance and escape and evasion and everything elite forces require for operating behind enemy lines, conducting high-risk missions, supporting national objectives. Military-industrial cooperation aims building indigenous defense production capabilities, reducing dependency on foreign suppliers, and creating employment and developing technical skills and generating export revenues and achieving self-sufficiency, strategically important for long-term sovereignty. Small arms manufacturing started in Burkina Faso, with Chinese assistance producing AK pattern rifles and ammunition sufficient for national needs and potentially for export to alliance partners. Expanding to heavier weapons including mortars and artillery and armored vehicles requires additional investment and technology transfer and training, but is achievable within decade, creating defense industrial base, transforming region from arms importer to arms producer, shifting economic benefits from foreign manufacturers to African workers and African engineers and African entrepreneurs. Doctrine development is ongoing, adapting military thinking to African conditions and African capabilities and African threats, rather than importing Western doctrines designed for different enemies and different terrain and different capabilities that may be inappropriate or ineffective when applied uncritically. African military thinking emphasizing light infantry and mobile operations and population-centric operations and terrain knowledge and logistics simplicity and technological pragmatism suits conditions far better than Western doctrine emphasizing heavy armor and air power and complex logistics and high technology that African militaries cannot replicate and that may be unnecessary, defeating enemies we actually face rather than hypothetical enemies Western doctrine addresses. Casualty care improvements save lives through better medical training and better equipment and faster evacuation and improved field hospitals. Russian and Chinese military medical personnel train African medics in trauma care and in triage and in emergency surgery, dramatically improving survival rates for wounded soldiers. Previously, many wounded died from treatable injuries because medical capabilities were insufficient. Now survival rates improve significantly, boosting morale because soldiers know that injuries don't mean death and that military values their lives sufficiently, investing in life-saving capabilities. Medical improvements also benefit civilian populations through military hospitals treating civilian casualties and through trained medics providing community health services during peacetime, building positive civil-military relations. Veteran care programs provide support for soldiers retiring or injured, ensuring they receive medical care and pensions and employment assistance and housing support and recognition for service. Previous governments neglected veterans, causing resentment and reducing military morale because soldiers saw former comrades suffering after service. Revolutionary government prioritizes veterans, demonstrating commitment to soldiers' welfare throughout careers and after retirement, building loyalty and commitment and recruitment by showing military service is honored and rewarded appropriately. Veteran programs are investments in military effectiveness through building esprit de corps and institutional pride and recruiting appeal, attracting quality recruits seeking honorable service with dignity. Military justice reform ensures discipline while protecting rights, preventing abuses that previously characterized military justice systems, where commanders exercised arbitrary authority and where due process was absent and where punishments were excessive, creating grievances, undermining cohesion. Reformed system includes military courts with trained judges and with defense representation and with appeals processes and with proportionate punishments, maintaining discipline while ensuring fairness that soldiers respect because they perceive justice rather than arbitrary authority. Fair justice systems build unit cohesion and trust in command and acceptance of discipline as necessary rather than resented, creating more effective fighting forces. Civil-military relations emphasize civilian supremacy and military professionalism and mutual respect between military protecting nation and civilians military serves. Military coups plagued African history because civil-military relations were dysfunctional, with militaries intervening in politics frequently and with civilians fearing militaries and with mutual distrust and with politicized promotions and with corruption and with every pathology undermining both institutions. Revolutionary government builds healthy civil-military relations through clear roles and through respecting military professionalism and through investing in military welfare and through maintaining civilian authority over military policy while allowing military autonomy over operational and tactical decisions and over internal administration, creating partnership rather than hierarchy or rivalry. What I do next is clear. Continue revolution, accelerate revolution, expand revolution, deepen revolution, complete revolution. French terrorism proves revolution threatens French interests fundamentally, proves policies are working, proves France is desperate, proves resistance succeeds. Therefore, continue everything. Accelerate resource nationalism, expand regional cooperation, deepen popular mobilization, complete French expulsion. Every dimension intensifies, every policy radicalizes, every measure strengthens. Revolution doesn't retreat facing terrorism. Revolution advances through terrorism, exposing enemy desperation and uniting populations and justifying escalation and creating momentum and building determination and achieving victory, ultimately through persistence and through courage and through accepting costs and through never surrendering regardless of casualties or setbacks or difficulties, because revolutionary commitment transcends personal safety and transcends temporary suffering and transcends everything except ultimate victory, achieving independence completely and permanently and irreversibly, establishing sovereignty that future generations inherit and defend defend and expand, building prosperous, independent, dignified Africa that ancestors dreamed and that revolutionaries fought for, and that terrorism cannot prevent because terrorism reveals weakness, not strength, and because revolutionary will exceeds terrorist violence, and because justice prevails over oppression, eventually, inevitably, permanently making victory certain, regardless of immediate obstacles. France's time is finished. Colonial era ended nominally 60 years ago, ending really now. Neo-colonial arrangements that survived independence are dying. French economic exploitation is dying. French political interference is dying. French military presence is dying. French cultural dominance is dying. Everything French is dying in Africa. This attack is death rattle, desperate violence from dying empire, lashing out, creating damage, killing innocents, accomplishing nothing strategically, accelerating its own demise, uniting enemies, justifying retaliation, creating determination, strengthening resolve. Perfect example of counterproductive violence driven by rage rather than strategy, and by desperation rather than confidence, and by past power rather than present reality, making failure certain because contemporary power balances shifted decisively away from France, and because African consciousness evolved rejecting French dominance, and because alternatives emerged ending French monopolies, and because everything changed making French position untenable, regardless of violence deployed, attempting, preventing, inevitable. My next move is continuing winning. Winning by developing, winning by uniting, winning by building, winning by serving population, winning by maintaining sovereignty, winning by refusing intimidation, winning by exposing French crimes, winning by building alternatives, winning by inspiring others, winning by proving revolution succeeds. Winning by completing what Sankara started and what Gaddafi attempted and what every African revolutionary envisioned finally achieving, because conditions are favorable, and because will is strong, and because alternatives exist, and because unity is building, and because youth are mobilized, and because populations demand change, and because empire is weakening, and because resistance is strengthening, and because history moves forward toward justice and toward independence and toward dignity, making victory certain despite obstacles and despite violence and despite terrorism that kills individuals but cannot kill movements, and cannot kill ideas, and cannot kill determination, and cannot reverse history that turns irreversibly toward African independence, finally completing after centuries of waiting and decades of preparation and years of fighting, arriving now through our actions and through our sacrifices and through our determination, building future that ancestors dreamed and that children will inherit, making everything worthwhile, including deaths and including suffering and including risks, because freedom justifies everything, and because sovereignty demands everything, and because dignity requires everything, and because independence costs everything but delivers everything, making payment acceptable and making sacrifice honorable and making victory sweet when achieved through collective struggle, persisting until completion regardless of duration or difficulty or dangers faced courageously together, building new Africa finally free. Economic diversification accelerates following French company nationalizations, creating opportunities for developing sectors previously dominated by foreign capital that extracted profits rather than reinvesting locally, and that prevented local entrepreneurs competing through monopolistic practices and political connections with previous governments serving foreign interests. State ownership of former French enterprises enables strategic direction toward development objectives, including employment maximization and technology transfer and skills development and regional integration and import substitution, and everything serving national interests rather than shareholder returns that previous private foreign ownership prioritized exclusively, often deliberately preventing development that might create competition or reduce dependency or threaten monopoly positions. Telecommunications sector nationalization particularly important because Orange controlled mobile networks and internet infrastructure, giving France access to communications data, including government communications and military communications and business communications, providing intelligence advantages and enabling surveillance and creating security vulnerabilities that hostile power exploited continuously. State telecommunications company now operates former Orange network with Chinese Huawei equipment replacing French equipment, eliminating backdoors and preventing intelligence collection and securing communications, protecting government operations and military coordination and business confidentiality essential for sovereignty and security. Additionally, state company provides affordable services to rural populations previously underserved because providing unprofitable services to remote areas didn't serve private profit maximization, but serves national development objectives, including connectivity and information access and economic opportunity and social inclusion. Energy sector transformation involves state company operating former Total gas stations with fuel imported from diverse sources including Russia and Saudi Arabia and Algeria and Libya, reducing dependency on French suppliers and French-controlled supply chains that created vulnerability to economic coercion and political pressure. Additionally, investing heavily in renewable energy, including solar power suitable for Burkina Faso's climate and geography, providing electricity access to rural populations currently lacking power and reducing diesel generator dependency and creating energy sovereignty, eliminating foreign control over energy supplies essential for economic activity and military operations in daily life. Chinese solar panels and Chinese technical assistance and Chinese financing enable rapid renewable energy deployment at costs far below Western alternatives, creating energy revolution, transforming economy, and improving lives and building sovereignty simultaneously. Banking sector nationalization creates state banks providing credit to priority sectors including agriculture and small business and manufacturing that previous foreign banks neglected, because lending to poor farmers and small entrepreneurs is riskier and less profitable than lending to established large businesses or to government or to foreign companies operating locally. State banks have development mandate, not just profit mandate, enabling lending, supporting productive activities, creating employment, and generating economic growth and building middle class even when immediate financial returns are modest, because long-term development benefits exceed short-term financial costs, making development banking essential for transforming economies stuck in low-income traps, because private banking alone is insufficient for development financing historically everywhere. Insurance sector under state control provides affordable coverage to broader population including poor households and small businesses and farmers previously excluded from insurance markets because premiums they could afford didn't generate sufficient profits, attracting foreign insurers serving only affluent customers and large corporations. State insurance provides agricultural insurance protecting farmers against drought and floods and pests, enabling agricultural investment and productivity improvements by reducing weather risk that otherwise discourages farmers from investments in improved seeds and fertilizers and equipment, fearing losing everything if bad weather destroys crops. Widespread agricultural insurance transforms rural economies by enabling intensification and commercialization and mechanization, generating productivity growth and income growth and food security improvements benefiting entire nation. Construction sector using former French companies now state-owned prioritizes building schools and hospitals and affordable housing and water systems and roads connecting rural areas instead of prioritizing luxury developments and commercial projects and government buildings that foreign construction companies focused on because profitable margins were higher and because corruption opportunities were greater and because serving elite clients was simpler than serving mass market. State construction companies employ thousands, providing training and building skills and creating middle-class employment while delivering infrastructure that populations need, and that development requires transforming lived experiences of ordinary citizens through visible, tangible improvements, proving that government serves people and that revolution delivers material benefits, not just rhetoric, making political support solid and sustainable and enduring. Industrial policy promotes manufacturing development through state investments and through protective tariffs and through local content requirements and through technology partnerships with Chinese and Russian and Turkish companies willing transferring technology, unlike Western companies guarding intellectual property, zealously preventing technology diffusion that might create competitors or reduce dependency. Priority sectors include agricultural processing, adding value to raw agricultural products through mills and canneries and packaging facilities, creating employment and increasing farmer incomes and reducing food imports and improving food security. Textile manufacturing, processing domestically grown cotton into finished clothing, reducing imports and creating employment and building export potential. Assembly industries producing consumer goods including electronics and appliances and vehicles under license from Chinese and Turkish partners, gaining technology and building industrial capabilities, progressively moving up value chains over time toward higher value production. Agricultural transformation continues as highest priority because agriculture employs 60% of population and because agricultural productivity determines food security and because rural poverty reduction requires agricultural development enabling smallholder farmers earning decent incomes and escaping subsistence poverty that has trapped rural populations for generations despite hard work, because colonial agriculture emphasized export crops serving European industries rather than food crops feeding African populations, and because post-colonial governments neglected agriculture, focusing on urban areas and on mineral extraction and on serving foreign interests rather than serving rural majorities. Revolutionary government reverses neglect through massive agricultural investments, including irrigation infrastructure enabling year-round cultivation and increasing yields dramatically, and extension services providing technical assistance and improved inputs and training in modern techniques, and rural roads enabling farmers reaching markets and selling produce profitably instead of produce rotting locally because transportation is impossible. Land reform continues, redistributing land from large holdings to smallholder farmers because land concentration leaves many farmers landless or farming tiny plots insufficient for decent livelihoods while large landowners leave land idle or underutilized or farm inefficiently because abundance of land reduces incentives for intensity. Land redistribution with security of tenure and with complementary support including credit and inputs and extension services enables smallholders farming productively generating incomes and producing food and building assets and achieving dignity through ownership and through productive work and through economic independence that transforms rural societies from hierarchical patron-client relationships toward egalitarian communities of independent farmers cooperating through associations and cooperatives and mutual support rather than depending on landlords or on moneylenders or on merchants who previously exploited rural populations systematically. Cooperative movement strengthens because cooperatives enable smallholders achieving scale economies and bargaining power and access to services that individuals cannot achieve alone. Agricultural cooperatives pool production for marketing, achieving better prices through collective bargaining and pool purchasing of inputs, reducing costs through bulk discounts, and provide credit through member savings mobilized collectively, and provide equipment sharing enabling mechanization otherwise unaffordable individually, and provide storage facilities preventing post-harvest losses, and provide processing facilities adding value locally. Credit cooperatives mobilize savings locally and lend to members at fair rates without collateral requirements that commercial banks demand and without exploitation that informal moneylenders practice, building financial inclusion and building capital accumulation and building community solidarity through shared economic institutions. Education expansion accelerates because education determines everything, including productivity and innovation and citizenship and social mobility and national development broadly. Building 500 schools during next 2 years eliminates school shortages that previously forced multiple shifts and overcrowding and excluded many children entirely from education, especially in rural areas where distances and costs and cultural barriers prevented school attendance. Additionally, improving quality through training teachers and providing materials and improving curriculum and reducing class sizes and everything necessary for effective learning, creating educated population capable of modernizing economy and participating in democracy and building nations successfully. Free education through university eliminates financial barriers, enabling talented students from poor families accessing higher education based on merit rather than on family wealth, democratizing opportunity and building larger educated elite and creating social mobility and reducing inequality in everything education enables. Healthcare expansion similarly eliminates barriers preventing access, including distance barriers addressed through building clinics in every community, and cost barriers addressed through eliminating fees for all services, and cultural barriers addressed through training healthcare workers from local communities speaking local languages and understanding local cultures. Preventive healthcare emphasis, including vaccinations and prenatal care and nutritional education and sanitation improvements and everything preventing diseases, is more cost-effective than treating diseases after occurrence, and dramatically improves population health and reduces mortality and reduces suffering. Healthy populations are productive populations, making healthcare investments economically rational beyond moral imperative of providing healthcare as basic human right that every government should guarantee every citizen. Youth programs address unemployment and lack of opportunity that creates social problems and drives migration and creates vulnerability to extremist recruitment. Programs include vocational training teaching practical skills, including carpentry and plumbing and electrical work and welding and automotive repair and computer skills and agriculture and everything enabling youth earning livelihoods through productive work. Entrepreneurship support providing training and credit and mentorship enabling youth starting businesses, creating employment for themselves and for others, building dynamic private sector complementing state enterprises and cooperatives, creating mixed economy with multiple ownership forms and multiple pathways toward prosperity. Youth engagement in civic life through youth councils and volunteer programs and political participation builds citizenship and builds leadership and builds commitment to national development, creating next generation of leaders emerging from revolutionary transformation that they helped building and that they will continue building throughout their lives. Women's empowerment receives particular emphasis because gender equality is justice issue and development issue simultaneously, since women constitute half population, and excluding half population from full economic and political participation wastes human capital and limits development potential unnecessarily. Programs include literacy for women who miss schooling because of previous discrimination, vocational training in non-traditional fields, including technology and management, enabling women accessing higher paying careers, credit programs for women entrepreneurs who face discrimination from commercial lenders, legal reforms ensuring property rights and inheritance rights and protection from violence and equal treatment. Women's economic independence transforms family dynamics and improves children's outcomes because women invest earnings disproportionately in children's education and nutrition and health, creating intergenerational benefits, multiplying impacts beyond immediate economic gains. Cultural revival strengthens national identity and builds pride and resists cultural imperialism that colonial and neo-colonial domination impose, systematically denigrating African cultures and promoting European cultures and languages and values, creating alienation and inferiority complexes that undermined confidence and self-respect. Promoting African languages in education and media and government, and celebrating African arts and music and literature and history and everything. African builds cultural sovereignty, complementing political and economic sovereignty, creating comprehensive independence across all dimensions of national existence. Cultural confidence enables innovation and creativity and authentic development, reflecting African values and African aesthetics and African worldviews, rather than imitating Western models that may be inappropriate or inferior for African contexts and African needs and African aspirations. Environmental sustainability integrates throughout development planning because environmental degradation undermines development through reducing agricultural productivity and through causing health problems and through depleting resources that future generations need. Reforestation combats desertification, expanding southward, threatening agricultural lands and threatening livelihoods and threatening food security. Water conservation, including rainwater harvesting and efficient irrigation and watershed protection, ensures water availability despite climate change reducing rainfall and increasing droughts. Renewable energy development reduces carbon emissions, contributing to climate change while providing energy access and building energy sovereignty. Sustainable agriculture practices, including organic farming and crop rotation and agroforestry, maintain soil fertility and prevent erosion and preserve biodiversity, ensuring long-term agricultural productivity rather than short-term extraction, mining soils until degraded, then abandoning lands. Disaster preparedness builds resilience against climate-related disasters, including droughts and floods increasingly frequent and severe because of climate change affecting Sahel region particularly intensely. Early warning systems enable populations preparing for droughts through diversifying livelihoods and building food reserves and migrating temporarily when necessary. Emergency response capacity, including stockpiles of food and medicine and emergency services and evacuation capabilities, reduces disaster impacts, saving lives and reducing suffering and enabling rapid recovery. Climate adaptation, including drought-resistant crops and water-efficient irrigation and alternative livelihoods, reducing agriculture dependence, enables populations maintaining livelihoods despite changing climate conditions that will continue worsening, requiring ongoing adaptation indefinitely. Regional integration accelerates because larger markets enable scale economies and enable specialization and enable infrastructure investments that individual nations cannot afford alone, and enable collective bargaining with external partners, and enable security cooperation, and enable everything that regional unity enables. African Continental Free Trade Area creates market of 1.3 billion people, enabling manufacturing at scale, competing internationally, and enabling African companies growing large enough, investing in research and innovation, and competing globally. Infrastructure integration, including roads and railways and telecommunications and electricity grids connecting nations, enables trade and enables movement and enables economic activity and enables integration practically rather than just rhetorically. Political integration remains distant goal, but economic integration builds foundation and builds habits of cooperation and builds institutions that eventually might enable political integration that Pan-African visionaries including Nkrumah and Gaddafi and Sankara advocated as ultimate objective, requiring patient long-term work, but remaining essential for Africa achieving full potential and full sovereignty and full dignity in world where scale matters and where isolated small nations are vulnerable and weak while united large blocs are powerful and influential. What happens next is revolutionary consolidation. Revolution succeeded seizing power. Revolution succeeded breaking French control. Revolution succeeded initiating transformation. Now revolution must consolidate by deepening changes and by institutionalizing changes and by making changes irreversible through building popular ownership and through building institutional capacity and through building economic foundation and through building regional support and through building international partnerships and through building everything necessary, ensuring revolution survives temporary setbacks and survives leadership changes and survives external pressures and survives everything, becoming permanent transformation rather than temporary disruption, eventually reversed when revolutionary energy dissipates or when external pressure succeeds or when internal opposition mobilizes. Consolidation requires years of disciplined, patient, systematic work that is less dramatic than initial seizure, but equally important for determining whether revolution succeeds, ultimately transforming society permanently, or fails, becoming footnote in history books, recording another failed African revolution among many that briefly challenged existing order before collapsing under internal contradictions or external pressure, leaving populations worse off than before because hopes were raised, then crushed, creating cynicism and despair that paralyzes future resistance for generations. Terrorism cannot stop consolidation of revolutionary gains achieved through years of struggle and sacrifice and determination, because terrorism is tactical weapon producing short-term fear, but incapable producing strategic outcomes that require sustained political organization and popular support and institutional capacity that terrorism inherently lacks and that revolution possesses abundantly. Cannot reverse gains including nationalized resources and expelled foreign bases and independent currency and regional alliances and popular mobilization and everything built systematically through deliberate planning and through mass participation and through institutional development that terrorism cannot destroy through isolated attacks killing dozens when millions support revolution and when institutions function regardless of casualties and when determination transcends individual losses, making revolution resilient against violence that previous regimes were vulnerable to because previous regimes lacked popular legitimacy and lacked institutional strength and lacked ideological commitment, making them fragile and easily destabilized through relatively modest violence. Cannot intimidate populations who understand revolutionary logic and who recognize terrorism proves enemies' weakness rather than strength, because strong enemies don't need terrorism, and because strong enemies defeat opponents through legitimate means including economic competition and political persuasion and military superiority, while weak, desperate enemies resort to terrorism precisely because they lack legitimate means succeeding and because they're losing through conventional competition, making terrorism admission of failure that populations recognize clearly. Cannot discourage leadership that expects violence and that accepted risks and that prepared for sacrifices, understanding that revolutionary transformation always provokes violent resistance from threatened interests, and that leadership expecting easy path is naive and unprepared, while leadership expecting violence is realistic and prepared and resilient, making terrorism anticipated cost rather than unexpected shock that breaks resolve. Cannot achieve strategic objectives including reversing nationalization or restoring French bases or preventing currency launch or dissolving regional alliance or ending popular support or any meaningful political outcome that terrorism theoretically aims achieving, because terrorism produces opposite effects, strengthening rather than weakening revolutionary government through uniting populations and through justifying repression and through eliminating moderates and through forcing polarization and through creating martyrs and through revealing enemies clearly and through everything that consolidates revolutionary power rather than undermining it, making terrorism strategically counterproductive for perpetrators while strategically beneficial for revolution. Paradoxically, terrorism reveals desperation of French government lacking effective tools for reversing African independence and resorting to violence because diplomatic pressure failed and economic sanctions failed and political subversion failed and coup attempts failed and assassination attempts failed and everything failed, leaving terrorism as final desperate option that will also fail because terrorism cannot succeed where other methods failed, since terrorism is weakest tool available, producing only casualties without producing political outcomes that more sophisticated methods might achieve if conditions were favorable, but conditions are unfavorable for France, making all methods ineffective and making continued resistance futile, yet continued anyway through desperation and through denial and through inability accepting defeat gracefully. Reveals declining power, evident through comparing current French capabilities against historical French capabilities when France casually intervened militarily across Africa, and when France easily orchestrated coups, and when France effortlessly manipulated African politics, and when France confidently dominated African economies, and when France unquestionably controlled African destinies, but now France struggles maintaining minimal influence, and now France fails preventing nationalizations, and now France cannot protect corporate interests, and now France resorts to terrorism, proving comprehensive power decline that is irreversible because power decline results from structural changes including Chinese rise and African consciousness evolution and alternative partnerships emergence and everything that shifted global power balance permanently away from Western dominance toward multipolar order, where France is regional power, not global power, and where French influence is contested, not assumed, and where French interests are vulnerable, not protected. Reveals lack of alternatives because if France possessed better options, France would use them rather than using terrorism that creates international condemnation and that strengthens enemies and that achieves nothing positive and that damages French reputation and that proves French criminality, making terrorism choice of last resort selected only when all alternatives exhausted and when defeat is imminent and when desperate violence is only remaining option even though futile. Reveals failure of previous methods, proving that decades of French strategy maintaining neocolonial control through corrupt African elites and through economic dependency and through military presence and through cultural dominance and through everything that worked historically no longer works because conditions changed and because Africans changed and because alternatives emerged and because resistance organized and because everything that enabled French dominance disappeared, making dominance unsustainable and making transition inevitable, and making French resistance futile, delaying inevitable temporarily, but preventing inevitable never. reveals everything favoring revolution, including popular support and regional solidarity and international partnerships and economic viability and political legitimacy and institutional capacity and ideological coherence and leadership quality and everything that determines revolutionary success, making revolution strong, while revealing everything disfavoring French position, including declining power and regional isolation and international condemnation and strategic confusion and moral bankruptcy and popular opposition and everything that determines imperial failure, making French position weak. Therefore, terrorism accelerates revolution paradoxically by proving enemies are weak, because resorting to terrorism demonstrates weakness, not strength, by uniting populations who rally around government facing external aggression, by justifying escalation, including harsher measures against French interests that populations accept because terrorism justifies retaliation, by creating momentum as populations demand action and demand comprehensive French expulsion and demand total victory, making government more radical and more aggressive and more successful. By building determination as anger replaces fear and as commitment replaces doubt and as resolve replaces hesitation, making revolution stronger after terrorism than before terrorism, by eliminating compromise possibilities because terrorism makes negotiation politically impossible and makes coexistence unthinkable and makes total victory necessary, by forcing clarity about friend-enemy distinctions and about revolutionary versus reactionary forces and about independence versus subordination, making choices binary and unambiguous, by creating choice between revolution and reaction, and between independence and subjugation, and between future and past, and between dignity and humiliation, making choice easy because populations overwhelmingly choose dignity and choose independence and choose future rather than choosing humiliation and subjugation and past, making revolutions popular base solid and making commitment total and making victory certain. Because populations choosing dignity will sacrifice everything achieving it, including accepting casualties and accepting hardships and accepting dangers and accepting everything necessary, because dignity justifies any cost, and because alternative of continued subjugation is unacceptable, making sacrifice acceptable and making perseverance inevitable and will persist indefinitely until success, because stopping means accepting defeat, means accepting continued exploitation, means accepting permanent humiliation, means accepting everything unacceptable, making persistence mandatory, regardless of duration or difficulty, making perseverance inevitable, making victory inevitable, making revolution unstoppable, regardless of violence deployed attempting prevention, because revolutionary will exceeds terrorist capability always throughout history, everywhere, proving that determined populations defeat terrorism invariably, and proving that revolutionary commitment transcends individual losses, and proving that collective will overcomes individual violence, making current struggles outcome predetermined by historical laws, demonstrating that revolutions win when supported popularly and when organized effectively and when determined absolutely, and by human nature valuing dignity and freedom and independence above safety and comfort and life itself, and by justice eventually prevailing over oppression, and by everything that makes freedom triumph over oppression, eventually, invariably, permanently throughout human history across all societies, proving current revolution will succeed inevitably regardless of French terrorism. 37 martyrs didn't die meaninglessly. They died advancing revolution by proving French desperation and by uniting Burkina Faso and by inspiring Africa and by changing history and by achieving immortality through sacrifice that transforms them from ordinary citizens into revolutionary heroes whose names will be remembered and whose sacrifices will be honored and whose deaths will be commemorated annually and whose legacy will inspire future generations fighting for independence and for dignity and for justice. We honor them through continuing struggle they died advancing, through winning revolution they died supporting, through completing transformation they died enabling, through building Burkina Faso they died defending, through achieving independence they died demanding, through creating dignity they died pursuing, making their deaths meaningful through our perseverance and through our victory and through our commitment, ensuring their sacrifice wasn't wasted but rather served advancing revolution toward ultimate triumph.